But at the risk of being off schedule at the very beginning, I wanted to say hi. How are you? I love seeing a lot of my colleagues and my students and my former students, and thank you so much for being here and for being a part of this. And this is our 8th annual North American Conference, and we're thrilled to welcome you here. And I don't have a lot to say other than thank you. And I hope that you enjoy this conference. I've enjoyed working with everyone and putting it all together, and I'm just honored that you're all here. And so I'm going to turn it over to Susan Bickley, who will do the important things going forward.
Well, Professor Gina Warren, I don't know if I could do anything more important than what you do for the Law Center, but good morning and good afternoon, I guess. My name is Susan Bickley. I'm a partner in Blank Rome's Houston office. At Blank Rome, we are just so delighted to host and sponsor the 8th annual North American Environment, Energy, and Natural Resources Conference here at the University of Houston Law Center. This will make 8 years in a row, and it's just such a delight to be able to host it with the University of Houston Law Center's EENR Center. Gina Warren is co-director of the EENR Center together with Tracy Hester, who I'll be introducing momentarily. The school houses tremendous expertise in the area of energy and environmental litigation, regulation, and policy. And so we know we're working with experts when we work with the University of Houston. Similarly, and forgive my having a little bit of a public announcement for Blank Rome, but similarly, Blank Rome has practitioners in energy regulation, environmental matters, in all aspects of both traditional energy and renewable energy. And in Houston, never has it been more important as we make this transition to a new energy world. That said, let me introduce our first speakers. I'm really thrilled. We've been very fortunate today. Unfortunately, John Neerman, the chairman of the TCEQ, came down with an illness, and we just were recently notified of that. And so, but aren't we lucky that we have Catarina Gonzales, who is also a commissioner on the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, to have stepped in for Mr. Neerman today, and we appreciate your being here, Catarina. She is also a proud alum of the University of Houston Law Center. And so she is both substituting for her commissioner or chair of the commission and as a proud alum. Let me introduce them both briefly. Commissioner Gonzales is a commissioner on the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality and was most recently a budget and policy advisor for the Office of the Governor, a position she held since 2018. She was formerly in private practice in law firms in Austin and in Houston. She is a member of the Texas State Bar Executive Committee Environment and Natural Resources Law Section and General Land Office Pooling Committee. She serves and has served on a director of a number of nonprofit boards, including a YMCA board of directors, on the board of the Children's Advocacy Centers of Texas, and I believe Dachshund Rescue. Isn't that true, Catarina? And as evidence of that, she has brought her dachshund with her today, so he's in an adjoining room. She received her Bachelor of Arts in Political Science from Trinity College and Juris Doctor from St. John University School of Law and a Master's of Law in Energy and Environmental Law from the University of Houston School of Law, and has been a visiting student at the University of Texas School of Law, where she sat on the board of the American Journal of Criminal Law. Tracy Hester, who is also going to be participating in this initial matter, teaches environmental law at the University of Houston Law Center. We co-directs with Gina Warren, the Law Center's Environment, Energy, and Natural Resources Center, and the University of Houston Center for Carbon Management and Energy. He is a well-recognized expert on the application of environmental laws to emerging technologies and unanticipated risks, including climate engineering, deep decarbonization, nanoscale materials, microplastics, and climate liability. In 2019, Professor Hester taught the first U.S. law school course on climate intervention law, which focused on emerging climate engineering technologies and legal challenges resulting therefrom. And he has a list of memberships and honorifics that could go down the side of my arm, and so I will cut that short, but just to say he also practiced law for over 25 years and served as a partner at at Bracewell LLP for 16 years, where he led the Houston Environmental Group. So please join me in welcoming Catarina Gonzales and Professor Tracy Hester, who will have a fireside chat on an area of interest to all of us, I'm sure.
Great. Thank you, Susan. And I have to say, I was delighted to discover I've been a partner at Blank Rome. Yeah, thank you. So first of all, thanks to all of you for joining us today. We're very excited to be having this fireside chat, which is actually a new experience for us. We're hoping that this format will have an opportunity to have a bit more of a free-flowing and interactive discussion and provide a little bit of space as well towards the end for you to ask questions to us from the audience. I'm Tracy Hester, and as Susan mentioned, I'm the co-director with Professor Gina Warren, who is the real star of today because she's actually organized this whole conference. I think the main thing I bring to this discussion is that I have been watching environmental law in Texas for a long time, and I think we all in the room know that all roads converge in Austin, and TCEQ is a pivotal player in dictating environmental policy and compliance and protection for the state. So in that regard, I would like for everyone to meet Catarina Gonzales, our newest TCEQ commissioner. As we've heard, she is also a proud UH Law LLM. And I wanted to start, since I know a lot of you have not had a chance to interact with her yet, to let Commissioner Gonzales perhaps say a little bit about her new role and her background.
First, who are my Dachshund people here? Anyone have Dachshund?
Oh, I don't have.
Okay. Dog people too. Okay, I'm going to look to y'all if I'm struggling a little bit, because y'all are my people. And as they said, Loki Wiener is here today, and I appreciate y'all letting me bring him. Just logistically, he needs to go to his grandparents' house while I go do the other things I need to do today. It's been a busy schedule. I'm trying to...
I will point out, I said if it's a true fireside chat, we'd have Loki up here with us, curled up between us on the floor, but that's okay.
He would dominate the whole
True.
chat, so we're going to have him out there, but he's a little disruptive. I'm sorry.
I'm disruptive. My apologies.
Oh, my mic is off.
We're not hearing you real great in the room.
Is that better?
We're hearing you online, but not...
Is that better?
Okay.
I had my mic off. I'm sorry. That was my fault. Okay.
And I'll just project.
So as Tracy said, I'm the newest commissioner. I've been there about 2 months now. So I do have my notes with me today because there was a lot to try to remember today. So if you see me referring back, that's why. As Tracy said, I was previously a budget and policy advisor for the Office of the Governor. Handled a number of issues for him, including being his environmental policy advisor. So that's, if you want to get appointed to TCEQ, that's a good way to go about it, because you get to know the governor, and he trusts you on the advice you give him. And there's been a lot of issues with TCEQ over the course of my time there. Also advised him on a number of other issues over the course of my time there. For a while there, I had local government, I had special purpose districts, I had housing, I handled the plumbers, the realtors, licensing regulation reform for him. And I would say that probably my biggest part of my job description was that last one where it's other duties as assigned, because our chief of staff was a very big fan of coming up with special projects for me. So things where I would say, but I don't understand why I'm doing that. That's not. And he's like, no, it's fine. Like you've got it. Oh, so. And I'll tell you a little bit about something that happened that I think will kind of inform my perspective on this role. During Winter Storm Uri, it was shortly after COVID, we had just gotten all of these, like $2 billion in rent relief funds to the state. And unfortunately, the program launched the day of Winter Storm Uri. There were a number of problems with it. One, no one had power, but two, the software wasn't ready, the contractor wasn't ready, they weren't staffed up. It was a disaster. And on top of that, we were in the middle of session, and we were also dealing with all the water systems that were down, from the perspective of the agency. Just busy time. That went bad. The news stories started hitting, and the governor said, go fix that. So in the middle of all the other things, I was on the phone every morning, every afternoon, every evening with the contractor and the agency and saying, okay, what was your goal? Or what's your goal tomorrow? Did you meet your goal? Why didn't you meet your goal? How can we meet your goal tomorrow? And then not only that, but taking the program reg by reg and saying, what are we requiring? Okay, show me the reg where you have to require that. And we were able to turn it around. It ended up being the most effective program in the country. In addition to that, we created what was called the eviction diversion program at the time, which was something that no one had done before, and it's become a national model. And then we also, they said when we got these funds that we could take 10% of those funds and use them for what was called housing stability. No one said what that meant. Okay, so we said, okay, this is what we think it means. And we were able to take those funds and divert them into homelessness programs that would have a longer lasting impact. And so I say all this to tell you that that's my approach to things. I like big projects, and I like to tackle big problems, and I like to take it and say, what is it we're doing as regulators and why? And make sure that what we're requiring is what we actually have to require and not more. And that we're also, of course, being protective of public health. We do have a dual mission at the agency. It is protecting our health and environment, but it's also economic development. And I'm a firm believer in both of those things. You have to have those, and I don't think there's any reason in the world they can't work together. Texas is booming, and that's bringing a lot of challenges. It's bringing increased demands on the agency in terms of being able to get permits out the door in a timely way, and having the staff that can be there. So that's really my approach to things. I think, and I also like to try to find innovative solutions to problems, like we did with that housing stability funds and the eviction diversion program, and that's what I want to bring to the agency.
Excellent. Well, since you mentioned big problems, of course, one of the major issues in Texas and the environmental front we're perennially wrestling with is air quality issues. Mm-hmm. And we have a 2015 ozone standard that we're now starting to try and change our strategies to attain. And my understanding is that we're about on the verge of voluntarily reclassifying areas for Houston and San Antonio and Austin. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit as to some of the challenges of trying to meet those standards and what you anticipate is going to happen when we try to essentially change our ozone designation status for Houston.
Well, one thing they didn't mention in the background is that I'm from Houston, previously worked for the county judge here, both under Eccles and Emmett, and was the environmental policy director. So very familiar with the challenges in Houston and air quality, and the challenges that we have now are the same challenges I worked on 20 years ago. Hasn't changed. The air has gotten cleaner though, but with new developments and new science and new administrations, we end up with new standards, and so those goalposts keep moving, right? And so now we found ourselves in this situation, and so the voluntary reclassification, that happens through letter of the governor, which is what we did already. We did that, I think, in October of 2023. And part of that is because at the time, they had proposed the redesignation in November, and I think the SIPs were due in January or February, and that's just like, that's not a realistic time frame. You can't put a SIP together. I don't know if anyone's ever worked on SIP planning. It's impossible to put a SIP together in a month or two. It's several years long process. And I can say that because I worked on these in Houston, Harris County. A lot of that SIP planning occurs through the local council of government, which HDAC here actually chaired the Regional Air Quality Planning Committee when I was working for the county judge. So did a lot in the way of SIP planning. And there's a lot of modeling that needs to occur. You need a lot of technical staff to work on that modeling, and you just, it's just not physically possible to put together a SIP that fast. So we were then in a bad position where the agency had missed the deadline for submitting the SIP. When that happens, there's failure to submit repercussions, and that can include a federal implementation plan and sanctions on increased cost to the industry. So the easiest thing to do is to seek reclassification, to bump it up. As a practical matter, it didn't matter because we're also still dealing with the 2008 ozone standard, and so a lot of those same requirements were already in place. And so it just gives you more time to show attainment and get your SIP in. So that's done via letter request from the governor. The Clean Air Act says shall grant. So we had heard that the EPA was going to publish a failure to submit notice, and so we got that letter in there ahead of that time. And then they went ahead and published it anyway. So to which there was a lot of head scratching and now litigation. But in the meantime, we're moving forward with what we need to do under those new classifications. And that's primarily, it's probably going to be rulemakings for implementing what they call reasonably available control technologies that are required under the new attainment standards. So the designations, I mean, they're, as a practical matter, they've been redesignated already. This is just doing on the back end what we need to be doing to move forward on meeting attainment.
So putting a bigger frame around it, if I'm understanding correctly, TCQ will do the reclassification decisions on the rulemakings necessary as part of that. And then we're going to have a period of time where we'll have to resubmit SIP issues back to EPA.
Yes.
So that's probably 12 to 18 months, most likely at least.
Yeah, there's specific deadlines that they've got for us on those, depending. I think the Bexar County SIP isn't as far away as the Houston one, just because the attainment deadline is further.
So for folks in the energy sector and other parts of the industrial corridor in Houston and other parts of Texas, essentially this is an issue that's a longer range issue. It's not going to provoke any kind of short-term action or dispute. It's just part of what we've been dealing with for decades in Houston.
Well, that depends on EPA because they could start the sanctions clock, and then there would be kind of some more immediate repercussions. So, like I said, we're still litigating over that. Not clear yet about how that's going to completely shake out, but we are on it.
Yes. Let's make sure our highway funding is not disturbed here.
Yes.
So one of
the
the areas where there is an intersection of air quality and energy is also in terms of energy production, particularly thermal energy production. Mm-hmm. I understand that the governor has also now issued a letter. I was wondering if you might want to discuss that.
Yes. So we all got a letter recently from the governor, and we don't ignore those. So he asked us, given the growing demands in Texas of population and businesses, we're booming and we need more megawatts on the grid. And they created the Texas Energy Fund that will kind of help fund some of these projects and get them going faster. And so in line with that, we have to make sure that our permitting is going to keep up with any demand from that. And so the governor sent the commissioners a letter, brought it with me just so I wouldn't forget all he asked for, and I can hit those points here. He wants us to I got it.
And while you're looking, this is a public document?
Yes,
So-
because he wrote it to us, it's open records, yeah.
Well, point being, if anyone in the audience were interested and they wanted to share it, we can just
Yes.
distribute it. So if you're interested, folks, we do have a copy and we'd be glad to distribute. Just let us know. It should also be available on the TCQ website, hopefully at some point.
I think so, I'm not sure.
Okay, good deal.
He wants us to prioritize air permit applications and all authorizations under agency authority for thermal dispatchable electric generation units. Ensure that adequate and dedicated staff give special attention to the thermal dispatchable electric generation units. Prioritize applications for permits receiving funding from the Texas Energy Fund, and to streamline application processing. So that is something, the commissioners we will sometimes meet in executive session and discuss our roles and responsibilities. So who's going to take point on which issue. Some of the commissioners handle Environmental Council of States, Western Water Council, nuclear energy. This one got tasked to me, so I will be.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I will be handling that in the future.
Would you say, so thermal power generation? So that assume obviously coal, natural gas fired power plants?
Yes, and that was the other thing. I said, well, what does that mean? So we're getting a list of what all we think qualifies under that, because the governor's also been very interested in small modular reactors. And so, I mean, that could come under there, right? Technically. But it could be, the other ones as well.
Absolutely, but also maybe cogen plants located in
Yes.
facilities as well.
Could be cogen, yeah.
Okay. So obviously big issues, but I can't resist asking perhaps a little bit from a higher level, what in your mind are the biggest issues that you'd recommend folks in this room should be watching for at TCEQ? Things that you think that maybe are not getting the attention that they should?
Well, I mean, to me, it seems like there's a lot of attention on a lot of things out there, right?
Well, you always have a full plate. There's no
Right. And, we hear from people about them. This will definitely, that will be something that people are very interested in because it's important. I think as we move forward, the advanced reactor stuff is going to become increasingly important. Where there's a working group at the Public Utility Commission, and so trying to make sure that everyone is working together to make sure that goes forward. I don't know how much y'all know about small modular reactors, but I
Can I ask? How many of you are very familiar with small modular reactors? Okay. For those of you watching from afar in the future, maybe about 10% of the room, so it's probably worth giving a very brief orientation.
Okay.
I hate to ask that, but
No, I mean, I'm amazed by them. We first, in the governor's office, we had a group come visit us from Abilene Christian University, and they are building a small test reactor there. Now, of course, they do these in other countries. I actually have a friend whose husband owns a business that manufactures small modular reactors, and he does it here in Texas. He just takes them and he ships them to other countries where they actually put the fuel source in. So, so they're just as they sound. They're very small. They're portable. One of the things I think is really cool about them is the fact that it's portable. Say there's a hurricane on the coast, you can just move one of these small modular reactors over there and power the city or HEB. You can scale them down, scale them up. Technology has existed for a very long time. I think since the 60s or 70s, but we haven't built them. And the NRC, of course, hasn't licensed a reactor in this country in about 60 years or something like that. I mean, it's crazy how long it's been since they've licensed one. So one of the things about the Abilene Christian project that's, I think, so amazing is that hopefully, this will demonstrate safety, effectiveness, a path forward for the NRC to be able to start, getting these things licensed, so that we can deploy the technology. And, this would help a lot, particularly in West Texas too, where right now the PUC is struggling with, well, how the heck are we going to get all the transmission that we need out there right now? Well, you have less to do if you're having to bring it from, the other parts of the more populated parts of the state. You can just put a small reactor over there. So that's really interesting to me, but it brings a whole host of other issues, waste issues as well with that. And the governor has been very clear that we will not have the storage of high-level nuclear waste in the state. That was actually another project that I worked on when I was at the office. He was very firmly against it. So I canceled my summer plans so we could do that in special session after special session, crafted the high-level ban. But we had known that we were going to end up in litigation over it, so had sent comments and with a litigation strategy in mind when we were doing it. Of course, the ban and the license, these were all challenged and went up to the Fifth Circuit. We won. And so that was upheld, and they vacated the license because I don't know if you knew, the NRC was trying to put what they called a consolidated interim storage facility out in the Permian. Well, two of them actually, one in New Mexico and one in Texas. And to which we said, well, okay, that's like a made-up thing anyway. Like that's not, you can't find that in the laws that Congress have passed. You have created this thing. So we had some issues with their authority to do that, which is ultimately where the court came down that, no, they did not have the authority to create this license and dump all the radioactive waste in Texas. So that was effective, and they even cited the comments that we'd done and the letters on the ban and the Fifth Circuit opinion, which was pretty interesting. So,
yeah, absolutely. And I guess a couple of quick things. For those of you who are fans of the major questions doctrine, this opinion is actually very interesting because it's one of the Fifth Circuit's most sweeping implementations of it. Number two, I assume, do you know whether or not there's going to be a certiorari petition on this one?
I think they tried, and I think it didn't get.
Okay, it is worth checking.
Yeah, I can't remember exactly, but the Fifth Circuit then came back and vacated the New Mexico license as well because they said, oh well, that's I think been the most recent development.
So the good news is we don't have essentially ad hoc nuclear waste disposal facilities in West Texas. The bad news is we're still storing radioactive waste on site for most nuclear reactors and pools, but hopefully Congress will figure this out at some point.
Well, they're tasked with it, right? They're tasked with coming up with a permanent repository. And,
yeah. And for those of you thinking this sounds awfully abstract, it comes close to you. One of the projects I worked at long ago, no names, no confidences, dealt with putting essentially a small modular reactor in the Texas Medical Center to provide an absolutely uninterruptible power supply during incidents like Uri or Harvey. And the technology's just grown leaps and bounds since then. I expect that NRC obviously is in the driver's seat for a lot of these issues, but TCEQ is going to have to actually handle the implementation of some of the environmental aspects of those.
Right.
And so
I mean, everything from, you have to transport it in Texas. How do you do that safely?
I'm resisting several flip comments right now. All right, I'm still resisting.
All right.
So with that in mind, other big issues, I just want to sort of, one I can't resist mentioning just because TCEQ has a role in this, but doesn't get asked about very often. We usually think of TCEQ as the agency that controls water quality and wastewater discharge permits, and I'm sure you've all interfaced with TIPD's permits in that regard. But you also play a role in water supply and water rights. I was wondering if you could share a few thoughts on that as well in terms of how the agency plays that role or what you think it should be doing. Because obviously water is a huge issue for Texas. We've got to find it with a population that's growing and industrial demands, and that supply is finite.
Right, and that probably is the biggest issue facing the state is water availability, just because it's difficult to make more without desal, right? Yeah. And yes, so the agency does, they do work on water rights allocations, making sure that users are fairly allocating under their rights, and that, you know, there's senior rights, there's junior rights. It's a complicated system of allocation. And then planning for drought. Drought is, it's bad right now. There have been times during summer where we keep a list of how many water systems have how many days of water, and we had some that had 60 days or less of water before some of the rain came recently. So we keep a close eye on that. Another thing that I had worked on is actually, it's tasked with another commissioner right now, but is the water treaty with Mexico. There's a 1944 water treaty, and it's just such a serious issue because it is, the State Department interprets it as a 5-year cycle. And so Mexico's position on it has been, well, we don't have to give you that water till like the 5th year. So what they really do is they'll kind of hoard it and they'll depend on a hurricane. So if there's a hurricane sometime in those 5 years, fills up the reservoirs, they'll release water. Of course, just not when we need it, right? The agricultural industry needs a, you know, predictable and reliable supply of water. And actually what happened recently, just terrible, the sugar industry down in the valley, because they can't get that, they're done. There's not going to be any more sugar cane. And not only that, but the co-op down there that processed it, they've closed. They're selling off their assets. And so Mexico's failure to deliver water has decimated the sugar industry in Texas. So we'll now be relying on imports from Mexico. And it's a complicated thing that happens over there because it's political. Their farmers make it political as well. The end of last treaty cycle, the farmers actually had a riot on one of the dams, and several of them ended up being shot by the Mexican authorities. So of course we don't want to see that, but our farmers need water too. And then the politicians use it. There's a lot of fighting between Mexican states about that and how that goes forward. And then to add all that, the ones that are a little further interior are controlled by cartels. And so you're dealing with that.
Wait, cartels controlling water supplies?
Yes, in Mexico, yes, absolutely. And so it's a really difficult position for the Mexican government to be in. But it's difficult and bad for our farmers here in Texas. And I don't know what the answer is. We've been working on it. We were a lot more successful in the last cycle because it was a different administration that really put a lot of pressure on Mexico. This one hasn't, and it's, like I said, that's a serious situation down there that with the water availability. And now we had been talking about doing what's called a minute, which is basically an amendment to the treaty to kind of get some more certainty in the delivery of that water. And that's probably not going to happen now because of election cycles in Mexico. So it just, and to make it even worse, there's really like not a lot of enforcement in that treaty. You would have to go back and find some way to amend it. And of course, that's the job of the federal government. We can't do that at the state level, but have really explored many options. None of them are great. And it's sugar today, but I asked the Farm Bureau, okay, what industries could be next? Cotton, citrus, they're at risk. Need water.
Like as in, this is a short-term, not long-term issue, like it
Oh,
could
yeah.
happen soon. Okay. But at the same time, the power of Texas to do something as a state government's constrained by the constitutional allocation of power to the federal government to negotiate directly with Mexico.
Yes.
So what are the tools are there? You just have to hope DC comes through.
Pressure on the State Department.
Okay.
Yeah. So keeping our congressional delegation well informed so that they can put pressure as well.
All All right, well, that might be a good segue to a generalization of the same dynamic, which is obviously we've talked about water supplies, but also water quality and permitting. And to a certain extent, we do that in partnership with EPA Region 6 and the federal government. I know that that's a relationship that waxes and wanes over the years. And I was curious if you had some thoughts that you could share. We could even turn off the microphone if you'd like, about how things are going with EPA these days and out of EPA Region 6.
It varies on the issue. I will say that I am deeply appreciative of a lot of the career staff over there, because they go there, it's just like with our agency, they go, they do their job, they're professional, they're smart. There are times that I think they may disagree with decisions, as I'm sure happens at our agency as well, but they do their job. And so it does, there have been times where relations over there have been better, and right now I wouldn't call it horrible, but there are actions that EPA has taken or the administration have taken that we're left scratching our head by. The pause on LNG is a good example. I was still in the governor's office when that happened, and that's something he's very concerned about and thinks is just crazy. I mean, it's something that impacts the entire world right now, and particularly Texas businesses. You have to wonder about the timing of it. There's some litigation over the border at the same time, so maybe a little retaliatory, I'm not sure. But we do strive to have, open dialogue with our counterparts.
And we can say for another panel on a future day some historical takes on the relationship between TCQ and EPA Region 6. But I'll just sort of offer the comment that it has been notably more acrimonious in the past, and we can share war stories about that if you'd like. But for now, as you've diplomatically put it, things seem to be in a fairly even keel and constructive.
Yes, and the regional administrator and our group even had a recent tour together at the ECOS conference. I don't know if y'all are familiar with ECOS, it's Environmental Council of States, so it's our counterpart agencies from all over the country. They came to Austin last month, I guess. Yeah, last month we had our spring meeting there, which was fun, and we all took a bus tour over to the Texas Disposal Ranch to see the giraffes and Rowdy the rhino and other exotic wildlife. So we all did that together. So at the end of the day, we're all trying to get along.
Now, you had mentioned small reactors and other energy challenges and thermal generation issues, but a lot of folks in the room also work with other forms of energy generation and renewable energy. Now, I think it's widely accepted that we're in the midst of an energy transition that over time will move us towards other forms of non-carbon based energy. I was curious what you think about TCQ's role in the energy transition, and what sort of things that you see as opportunities and things that we need to watch out for.
I think from the governor's perspective, though, I think he still sees it as all of the above, right? I think some of the EPA rules are going to make coal, prohibitive, but that's by design. But Texas has had an abundance of natural gas, and I think we'll continue to do that. One of the projects I worked on when I was there as well was getting the hydrogen hub here. And so we were pleased to see that happen. I think we've been supportive of that as well. One of my big concerns with hydrogen is the amount of water that it takes. It's very water intensive, especially make green hydrogen. And with the water supply the way it is, it's concerning. And I think there's been some recent articles too about industrial users taking up the last water rights in some parts of the state. We need to make sure we have enough for our consumers as well. And so the agency, some of those things, especially the type 6 wells, those have been delegated to Railroad Commission. So we are in a basically technical assistance sort of role with a lot of those. But especially with those underground injection wells, so when they get the application, they'll send it over to us for a determination to make sure that it doesn't fall under TCQ, that it's this other type of well. And then we work with the Railroad Commission on it, because it's not just the underground injection. I mean, there may be things over there where you don't want to contaminate the water supply or existing geography or other wells in the area that we need to think about that are slightly different that do fall under our jurisdiction. So a lot of it's coordination on that. And when Railroad Commission has been seeking delegation from EPA, we've definitely supported them on their application and their technical assistance role as well. So.
Well, I've got to ask, because I know a lot of people in the room want to know too. How do things stand on the delegation? I know Louisiana's gotten theirs. We know we've been trying to get Texas, but it seems to have been kind of a little bit tough to dislodge.
I mean, I think it's moving along. So, yeah. I think Louisiana's was maybe for more political reasons, so that theirs was a little held up.
Okay.
It's moved now, so.
All right. Hey, as the law professor, he wants to start saying, so are we talking months, days? That's okay.
I don't work for EPA, so.
Okay. All right. Well, then, in that regard, we've talked about the role that TCQ plays with other agencies and with the EPA, but of course, the other big power player in Texas is the legislature. And I was curious if you had any comments or thoughts about the last legislative session and what came out of that, what you wish that'd come out of that, and what you think might be for the interim session, things that we should be thinking about.
Well, I think part of the reason I'm sitting in this chair is because Sunset went well.
There you go.
Because that was one of my main tasks during the session, was helping manage Sunset from the governor's office perspective, and I don't think it could have gone better. When you have the Sunset, is everyone familiar with Sunset, how that works? Yeah, anyone? Okay. So, it's a comprehensive look at the agency, and every part of it and every aspect of it is open. And there's just such a great opportunity for mischief to occur when we're under Sunset. I think it went pretty well. The changes they needed to implement went through. The bills were kept, pretty clean. Nothing crazy happened, and it wasn't a nasty floor fight or anything. And so the process went smoothly, and we're currently still implementing some of the recommendations. Some of them, when I've had other agencies go into Sunset, that did not happen. And I will give you an example. I had the plumbers in the 2019 session when the legislature failed to continue them. A lot of that was over. There was some fights about the legislature wanted to move them to Texas Department of Licensing and Regulation. The plumbers did not want to go. They like having their standalone agency. Plumbers can be pretty protectionist with their licensing, to say the least. And so there were some nasty fights. The bill at time was failing to move, failing on votes, and ultimately came down to the last day. They were basically told me and the legislative director, go talk to members and try to get them to change their votes. Came pretty close on a motion to reconsider, but did not get there. So then at the end of the session, the plumbers board had not been continued. And I don't know if y'all know it's not just people going in your house with a plunger and a snake. It's also gas for hospitals and some other things that are pretty important and that could, blow up if they're not done correctly by people who have the right training. So that was important. Well, so then it was, well, what are we going to do now? One of the bills that had passed, though, gave the governor some emergency powers in areas that had been impacted by storms, such as Hurricane Harvey, where people were still rebuilding here. And so we were able to use those to temporarily continue the agency suspend the statute, basically saying it was going to go away until the legislature could come back and continue it or do whatever they were going to do in an orderly manner. And so we were able to do that. But so I've seen both sides of it, where it goes really poorly and then where it goes really, really well. And I, been able to kind of advise people who come after me in the office, to be paying attention when, if the votes are failing on just coming out of committee or things like that, you really need to be raising the red flag and, understanding your agency and the dynamics behind it. But I felt like the sunset went well. I feel like, there's some members that have some issues with the agency, but overall, I think they think they're doing a pretty good job. We're implementing legislation and sunset, like I said, right now. There was some dairy waste application bill. There was a little boil water notice bill that was one of my bills that ended up being real controversial, and we didn't understand why. It was just like, we just want you to tell us when you're going to go under boil water notice sooner than this like federally mandated 24 hours, because when y'all, especially big cities like Austin or Houston, when they have these boil water notices, there's things that we have to do at the state, right? Like we have to get like water positioned for people and things like that. And you can't just tell me, way later and expect that all of that's going to get done in a timely manner. There's things from the emergency management perspective that you have to be doing as soon as you know. And I don't know why that was so controversial, but it was. But we're implementing that now, putting the rules in on that. And then now we're getting ready for next session. So currently what that looks like at the agency is our legislative appropriations request, putting together the budget for the next 2 years. And that's going to be important because partially on the air side, right? I mean, there's so many different rules that have been coming down from EPA and then all of these SIPs that we've got to do, SIPs, FIPs, transport, all of these things that we have to do that we need more air staff for, and we need qualified air staff, and we need to be able to pay them. And that's been a problem as well. In the height of COVID, we had about 400 vacancies, and that impacts the agency's ability to function. Some of the ways that we've worked to address that, more remote work. Austin's expensive to live in, and so if we can get people from other parts of the state that don't necessarily need to be in the office every day, that's what we want to do. One thing that, as I've been meeting with different divisions, what I've been encouraging them to do is part-time work, because there are some technical people out there. You may have a mom who's an engineer and has young kids and maybe doesn't want to, give up her career entirely, but maybe needs to have more flexibility because she's raising young kids, or, a father raising young kids, or people who, they have different seasons of life, right? They're parents, they may need to flexibility in taking care of their parents. And so giving them the options to do that so that we can retain some of the staff when we can't pay them what the private sector can pay them. I think that's important to look at every way to do that possible. And I think also just creating a culture at the agency where people want to be there. Letting them know that they're valued and that we appreciate them, and that and that we want them to work there. And you can't always show that in a monetary way when you work in government, but there's other ways you can do it. Like I said, I've only been there 2 months, but my first week there, they have a chili cook-off on Valentine's Day every day. I didn't officially enter my chili. I feel I would have won. But I use it as an opportunity to just meet people. It's like, well, everyone's here at headquarters getting chili, so here's serving you my chili. And then the legal services office, they have a bake sale to fund their retreat. Made them some cookies. I mean, cookies are not good. My chili's good. Cookies are not good. But I participated, and then went and bought a bunch of baked goods and gave them out in the office because I don't eat baked goods.
We may have to steal that tradition. I think U of H needs a Valentine's chili cook-off. Would you guys be okay with that? Although the last time I went to a chili competition, the judge mentioned something about flies not lighting on the chili. But anyway, it's a long story.
Okay.
So it sounds like then no more sunset for now for at least a decade.
Right, yeah, we're done with sunset.
So next session, sort of the decks are clear now. So if there's anything that you see bubbling on the horizon, we should be watching out for beyond just giving you the the financial resources the agency needs to run.
I think the biggest issue that we're going to be looking at, and that's because it's in the interim charges that the Lieutenant Governor just put out, will be dealing with concrete batch plants. And so there's some things here I can't say too much on, but it's because they're going to come before the commission and we're going to have to make some decisions. But we'll have to look at what that means, all in the context of the new particulate matter standards and then the protectiveness review that the agency had previously done. So I think we'll see some movement there, but I also think it's great when the legislature gives us some direction on things. Because a lot of times, we'll have meetings with legislators and they'll say, well, we want you to do X, Y, and Z. And then I'll say, well, we're the regulators, we do the enforcement, but y'all set the policy. So if this is something over there that you need done legislatively, I mean, that's not my call. I can't and wouldn't, try to set my own agenda. And the governor's number one thing that he tells appointees is follow the law. And so that's what I'm going to do on there.
All right, well, in the spirit, if you need folks from outside to suggest to the legislature that perhaps things like we discussed, expanding the TC commissioners from 3 to 5, just let us know. We're glad to make the calls.
Yeah, we talked about that. I said, just because with open meetings, it's so hard sometimes to just have a conversation with your colleagues. You can't do it. And that was, for me, one of the more difficult things coming on here is because, I was their advisor, so I knew the other commissioners, and we go to lunch, and I, enjoy their company, and we can't do that now. You could technically have lunch, but the perception I think other people would have that you're talking about business and not just Loki the wiener dog, which the chairman loves Loki. He likes, I like talking about his dog Sheriff, although Sheriff can't come up there because Sheriff has a bite record, but Loki does not. And actually, it's funny, Loki, who's in there, he's wearing his little TCQ bandana. This is actually my first act as commissioner when you start, the day you start, you go to HR for your orientation and fill out your paperwork, and they have a merch store there, merchandise. And so I said, what do we got for dogs? And they were like, we don't have anything for dogs. I'm like, well, we need stuff for dogs. So this week we got stuff for dogs. We have little TCQ bandanas, and all the pups are going to look stylish. And I sent that, if you know, Toby Baker used to be the executive director of TCQ, very good friend of mine. He's now in the governor's office as the deputy chief of staff. So first thing, I sent him a picture of the bandana and a little note I got from HR. And I said, leaving my legacy.
Well, as long as it's available in the online gift store for TCEQ.
I don't know if I got to see what they got. Yeah. Right. Well, I think next we need bandanas of different sizes because that one's a little big for him. And then I've also been pressing some like disaster casual doggy wear. So, like those little fishing shirts with a little branded logo because, he may need to go on the scene with me or something.
So you did mention one of the issues that you think might be bubbling up would be batch plants, which before we move on, I should remind, for those of you, are you all familiar with the Open Records Act issue, or the Open Meetings Act issue that Commissioner Gonzales was mentioning? We have a requirement that any meeting of a quorum of the commission be publicly noticed in advance and an opportunity for people to participate. When you have 3 commissioners, it means anytime 2 of them meet in the hallway, that's a quorum. They literally cannot talk to each other unless it's on the record, which is, you are not saying this is me, nuts. So I just wanted you to appreciate, some of you who've not experienced this, that this is something that things like this, we should invite legislative support for thinking about how to perhaps make things easier for you guys.
It is challenging, and actually, Winter Storm Uri is the reason that the PUC went from 3 to 5 commissioners, because if there's an emergency, you have to call a public meeting, and that's part of the reason. I mean, it caused some issues, because the chair was, of the PUC was basically having to do everything during the storm, and then, of course, she ran into some significant issues and had to step down, and then the guy who replaced her temporarily, who also subsequently had some issues, he wasn't up to speed because he couldn't talk to her about what had happened, as they were going. And so it is difficult, especially in time of emergencies. I'll also tell you another little anecdote, though. My special counsel, Jessie Powell, I think has probably stepped out with the dog real quick, but she's great. She started Monday, but before she started, there was an issue that came up for agenda. And how this works, the process kind of internally, is that general counsel will brief the commissioners on what's on the agenda, and you talk about it, and sometimes you agree with their recommendations, sometimes you don't. And this was my second meeting I was going into, and there was a recommendation I kind of just fundamentally didn't agree with. And but you don't know where the other commissioner's on it. And I'm thinking, well, great, I'm going to walk in this meeting, and this is my second meeting, I'm going to get shot down, and I don't know what to do here. Because, you're worried about that. It's like, well, maybe it's just something I don't know, and, I didn't have anyone I could talk to about it other than the general counsel who I disagreed with. So I said, well, asked one of the aides just kind of generally, and she said, well, the best advice I got on it was like, well, the good thing about it is they go in order of seniority. So you're going to go third. And so you're going to know where the other two are before you ever have to say anything. And it just so happened that the chair laid it out, and he laid it out, and it was exactly the way I thought about it. And so I didn't have to be embarrassed on the dais. But it's difficult because you just, you don't have anyone you can talk to about it other than your counsel. Your counsel kind of has to act as your firewall, because there's all kinds of ex parte communications you can't have as well that you're about to have. I'll tell you another quick funny story. The lieutenant governor sent us a letter this week, and the only part of the letter that wasn't blacked out after it had been redacted was a line asking us to halt permanent cement production facility permits in Texas. But everything else, I don't know what that letter said because I couldn't read it. But she's the one that's got to, talk to general counsel and have those conversations. And she also can't tell me, if she incidentally finds out, what the other commissioners think about something. She can't tell me that, because then you're creating a walking quorum, which has criminal penalties. I mean, it's a serious issue. So it makes it really difficult to.
So thanks for indulging me. That's a pet peeve of mine is it needs fixing, but that's for another day. I will ask one more question, but I want to remind everybody that we will have time for you to ask questions at the end, and we'll have a microphone available to you. But I figured I'd end on a topic which I know everyone here is interested in, which is you mentioned concrete batch plans, which oftentimes is viewed as essentially a surrogate for environmental justice issues. And I was wondering if you had thoughts that you could share in terms of environmental justice as an issue in environmental regulation and sort of any kind of policy drivers from the TCQ's perspective that you have to be sensitive to in that regard.
I mean, I think part of the problem is that EPA wants us to require things that we can't require under statute. That's not in the regulations. That's not something that the legislature has said go and do. So that makes it difficult because in a lot of their, Congress hasn't said to them, go and require environmental justice, and this is what environmental justice means. I mean, we have kind of the basis of this is, Title VI, and then this executive order from, 20, 30 years ago, right? And And so I think that ultimately, I think courts are going to have to step in and say, you have authority or you don't have authority. I will say right now, we don't have any open Title VI complaints. I think that one may be coming probably soon. TCQ, you know, we don't discriminate on the basis of race or sex or anything else when we issue these permits. It's, does the permit meet the obligation or the requirements? It's a hard issue, and I think it's a harder issue in Houston because I don't think that it's genuinely based on racial discrimination. I think it's based on economics and the fact that Houston doesn't have zoning. We don't have these same issues as much in other parts of the state because other cities are able to provide for zoning so that you don't have a concrete batch plant so close to, you know, a neighborhood or a school. But at the same time, I think it's important that we're protective of public health for everybody, and we need to do that within the limits of our authority in the law. But I think that's part of what we'll look at going forward, hopefully with the legislature's guidance. Hopefully they will, you know, would they have the interim charge? Hopefully they will step in and give some, you know, clearer guidance about how they want us to regulate that.
In reading between the lines there, if the major difficulty is the lack of any kind of regulatory direction from EPA of an enforceable standard.
I mean, yeah, it changes, right? Yeah. Because it changes by administration, because what that means, environmental justice, I mean, these things haven't really been defined by Congress or in federal law. I hear Loki.
I think Loki has a question now.
Yeah, Loki, we have a question. Like, where's mom?
No, I only ask because EPA is trying to fill in some of those holes now. Mm-hmm. Those of you probably aware that EPA has released in final form the new regulation for synthetic organic chemicals manufacturers, which is, yes, 1,371 pages long, but buried in the back are discussions about how they're going to incorporate environmental justice into issuing permits for hazardous air pollutant emissions, which will be enforceable, which is going to perhaps then tee up this issue, but not yet. They still have to publish in the Federal Register, and then it's off to the courthouse. So it sounds like stay tuned at this point.
Yeah, and I mean, some of the complaints, you know, in Louisiana at least, have been dismissed recently because the courts there found that they didn't find that they had the authority to be administering it the way that they did. And so, and that there's some carryover to Texas in that. And so I think, you know, we're still going to be dealing with this issue.
And while I'm not a speaker, I can't resist adding, for those of you who are interested in that issue, it's also where the district courts enjoined EPA from enforcing the environmental justice policy. And for the first time I've ever seen, EPA has actually filed a certification with the district court that they're not going to enforce environmental justice in that district of Louisiana. So this issue is being teed up for judicial testing. The issue then is what sort of applicability will have to other jurisdictions, including within the Fifth Circuit. And I'm not trying to put you in a place where
I think other
litigation issues, but
other states are very interested in it. There was a letter that the Florida Attorney General just wrote that a lot of states signed on to, you know, discussing that and the disparate impact issues with it. And I believe the Texas Attorney General signed on as well. So we'll see.
Excellent. So I literally have a list of 20 other questions I could ask, but I figured this is a moment I should actually let you guys have a chance. So Professor Warren has a microphone if anyone would like to ask a question of Commissioner Gonzales.
Yes, please let me know, and I'll bring the microphone to you. Okay, or I'll pass it, maybe.
I ask that we not get the box where you throw the microphone across the room to people.
What's been the most surprising thing you've seen since you arrived to the commission in the last 2 months? Surprising in the way of working or substance, just anything?
I think for me, just the whole agenda process is, just because that wasn't something that I had really been super exposed to. You know, I'd worked on the policy side. I had, you know, worked with the commissioners, and so I worked with the executive director side pretty well, so I have a pretty good idea about how that office functioned. But the commission was a little bit of a mystery to me. I think I've been able to slide into it pretty well just because I understand the policy and I know, where the governor's office is on things, and then understanding the politics too. But the whole agenda side of that it's just a different process, and there's some things I'm like, why do we do it that way? Why do we? A lot of questions. I have a lot of questions all the time. I'm sure I've been driving the general counsel crazy, and she's happy that Jesse has joined us because I'm like, well, okay, but what do we call it that? It's like there's even some motion, and it's like a 806 or something, and I'm like, well, where did that come from? It's like, well, it was some legislation 20 years ago. I was like, okay, but there's been like a million SB 806s since then, so why are we still calling it that? Can't we like come up with a different name? Just things like that. Just, I don't know. I don't know if that really answers your question, but for me, it's just been, well, okay, I'm trying to get my arms around that sort of thing.
So here in Houston, a lot of us are concerned with flooding, but coming from a ranching background, I'm always aware of the need for water for livestock and farming. You talked about the problems with the treaty with Mexico, but what about the rest of Texas? Are we doing enough right now to prepare for the next drought? And what are we doing to think about how we manage the interaction between existing water rights and demand for communities, say for the Colorado River, and whether farmers get enough water in the next drought cycle? I know it's kind of a convoluted question.
No, I mean, I think it highlights, though, what we were talking about earlier is that, we as an agency, we administer the laws as they are, right? We administer the water rights system the way it is. And so if we feel that that's not a process that works, that's the legislature's call. We do have things in our rules that encourage conservation and reuse and those sort of things that help with that. But there's a lot of things at the legislature that they're working on. Chairman Perry from the Water Committee in the Senate side that's his thing. I mean, his water is his issue, and he is very invested in solutions or trying to find solutions for the future. Just because, absent more rain, I mean, we're running into a bad situation again. I hear you, but I think the agency is doing what they're supposed to do. They do, a 5-year plan, but it's hard. It's not. You have a very complicated question. Yeah, and it's hard to say that. Are we doing everything we can? I don't know. I mean, I think we're administering the system the way that it's set up.
Yeah. If I could offer an unsolicited grace note on that one, we remember we did have at least a vote not too long ago that established a new funding for water infrastructure projects, a pretty sizable one, constitutional issues involved.
Administered by the Texas Water Development Board,
right.
Not us.
But they're very much planners. They're looking ahead and building out a strategic plan going out 50 years to build those water supplies. And as a result, we don't see immediate impact sometimes, and it creates anxieties. I will say that one thing that is a bottleneck is that if you're building infrastructure, if you're building dammed areas, that is an area where TCEQ and other federal agencies get involved because environmental permits are typically the gateway that you can get those built. And we've had proposals, for example, up in the Dallas area for water reservoirs that have they've been caught in limbo for years and years because they can't get the environmental issues worked out. We're going to have to figure that out because this is now me talking, not official statements of any sort, but climate change is only going to exacerbate these issues. Under most projections, West Texas will get drier and East Texas will get wetter. And that's going to complicate our water planning pretty tremendously.
And, once you build the infrastructure too, you've got to keep it up. And there's, some issues right now with dam safety, which always makes me giggle. Amistad is a perfect example, and you've got to get the Corps out there to fund these projects and to actually do the work, and that's no easy feat. So, yes, there's the planning, there's the fund from the Water Development Board. But there's also aging infrastructure just on our pipes, and so there's some federal money coming for that, for the lead and copper pipes, to replace some of those. So, but that, again, is another thing that the Water Development Board is implementing. We're kind of helping with identifying where the systems are that need it, but that's mostly on their end.
So I have a question for you if no one, I'm happy to pass this, but I'm really curious. You were talking about the nuclear modular units and that Texas doesn't allow permanent storage facilities. And so what do you have an idea of what the best path forward would be for having more nuclear, but still addressing the problem that we have for the waste for it?
Well, I think that's, the federal government needs to come up with the permanent repository, which is what they're tasked with doing under the nuclear waste act. I mean, they that's their job. It's right now under statute it's supposed to be Yucca Mountain, but they just defunded that project, so it's not going to be that. So they need to go back and find a permanent solution for storage. I mean, it should be a deep geologic repository. It shouldn't be on the surface, which is what it would have been out in West Texas in the largest producing oil field in the country. That's not a good place for it. And that was the purpose of, a lot of the governor's concern is that there's safety issues, there's, terrorism, emergency issues, and that's not the place for it to go. And they, under the scheme that they created, it was gonna be like 2 20-year licenses. So when you're talking about 40 years of it sitting on the surface out in Andrews County, is that an interim storage solution then, or does it just stay there forever because Congress hasn't done anything about it in the last 40 years anyway? That was the perspective on it. So they need to act. And the small reactors, part of the cool thing is some of those can reprocess fuel. So you can use some of this fuel that's sitting on these sites that are existing right now and use them. I mean, some use other kind of things as well, but the technology is great, and it's, I think, the future of energy in this country.
I may have to eat these words, and you didn't ask me, but I'll just add. It is amazing the advancement in nuclear reactor design technology now. We're not anywhere near where we used to with the large-scale water-cooled reactors. There's an enormous array of different fuels, of different cooling systems, of passive safety systems. We just have to sort of figure out how we're going to make it easier to get it out in the field in a safe way. And the NRC is aware of that. It's hard to do because it's so enormously controversial. The other thing where I'll really eat my words is I have to admit I'm a believer. Fusion's around the corner. It really is. We got people that will actually be able to buy stock in their companies not too far away from now, and I'll stop there before I get myself in deeper trouble.
I mentioned the test reactor at Abilene Christian, but Dow is building one too out in, what is that area called?
What, Freeport?
Freeport, yeah. Yeah, so they're trying to get their license up and going as well.
Yeah.
And I think it's a cool project.
If I remember right, didn't that project have a desal component as well?
I don't remember if it did or didn't. Yeah. They own some water rights down there.
Well, they own.
Yes.
All right, any other questions? One more,
You have
here we go.
one more? Here we go.
You got to me thinking about fusion coming around the corner and other energy sources. Does the TCEQ get involved at all with battery technology?
I think remember I've been there 2 months. We do battery for electric generation or other
Well, all the challenges around the big batteries. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure what our role is going to be on that. Yeah. So.
All right, well then, I will do my last duty as moderator, which is to say thank you so much for joining us.
Sure. Thank you.